Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to our channel, and thanks for logging on. Today, 2 times 2 time zones is 4 times the fun, as the high-flying pilot's watch of our moment goes up against one that flies below the radar. Travel watch extraordinaire, each one, 40mm in stainless steel, Grand Seiko versus Rolex, starts now. Let's talk about the IT watch of our moment. Well, along with the Nautilus 5711. But this timepiece, which bowed at Baselworld 2018, marked a return to form by the GMT Master, the first ever unification of the historic Pepsi shaded bezel, first conceived for Pan Am pilots, with Cerachrom ceramic and a stainless steel case. It also marked the return of the much loved, if rarely seen, GMT Master Jubilee bracelet. So let's throw this one on the wrist and get a sense of it. It is not a large watch, but it's bigger than historic GMTs. The 40mm super case has an impressive wrist stance, and on my 16cm circumference wrist, you get a good sense of its scope, its footprint. It is broad. It takes up a lot of wrist real estate, but it's elegant because it's slim, at only 12.1mm thick. That's 14.3 for the Grand Seiko, 12.1 for the Rolex Advantage Geneva. You'll also note that lug to lug it's a 48, but if you include the solid end links, minimal though they are, of the bracelet, it's 49.5 lug to lug, which is exactly the same as the Grand Seiko on its bracelet. 20mm spacing between the lugs, and let's maybe give you one super wide shot so you can see the watch in proportion. Folks have been asking me for wide shots, so that's how it looks. You can see it is a cuff-friendly timepiece. Getting close hauled once more, the Jubilee is a wonderful piece because it's no longer a ropey and loose dress bracelet. Now with all solid links, it can actually serve the role of sports bracelet. Solid and secure, and better vented than the Oyster. It's actually a better option on hot days because of the many gaps between the many small links. Combination of polish and satin. Moving down to the clasp, you can see that it's a premium Rolex clasp, fully finished inside and out. It has the combination of double finish on the top and polish on the inside. It also uses a beak and hook locking system in tandem with the clamshell, so it is sure tight once closed. Now there are a few measures of adjustability built in. You have the individual removable links, you have the 5mm tool-free Easy Link system, and then you have 3 different anchoring points inside the clasp body itself. So you have a lot of adjustability built into this clasp, as well as the security of the double lock. Jumping back to the case, you can see this one is fairly slab-sided, as the super cases tend to be, but it does have robust shear guards for the crown, and the crown itself being a trip lock, I suspect the 100-meter water rating on this watch. Generally, the rating for the twin lock crowns with the trip lock, 100 meters, is probably conservative. The bezel gives you the ability to offset from GMT, so if you do set that 24-hour second time zone to Greenwich Mean Time, you can then use the GMT offsets, so GMT minus time zones or GMT plus time zones, to temporarily read 3 time zones off the dial. The first GMT Master bowed in late 1954, but the first GMT Master II, with a true independent second time zone, bowed in 1983, by which point the watch was less of a pilot's watch and more of a traveler's watch for those who fare by air. And this is the ultimate travel watch, being both versatile and wonderfully loomed for visibility in dimmed airline cabins during red-eye flights. Cyclops eye present and correct as ever. A controversial point, but one cannot argue with its legibility. White gold indices and hands and a lacquer black base. Solid case back. Inside, 3-day power reserve, Rolex caliber 3285, 2 time zones, parachrome blue anti-magnetic hairspring, free sprung balance, full balance bridge. Again, Rolex Chronergy escapement technology, which is Rolex's answer to Omega's coaxial system. Now, the Peacock. Properly the successor to the watch that won the 2014 GPHG. This watch has impressive pedigree. Launched in 2017, just a few months before the Pepsi bezel steel GMT, the watch was part of a 700-piece series, and I'll do my best to show this dial to good effect, but it does defy videography in some respects. It has an exquisite stamped pattern with a flowing, billowing radial pattern, and there's a varnish and a galvanizing that's applied to the dial to give it that green metallic tinge, and then the gloss that comes with varnish. You can see that the dial furniture is extraordinary, 3-dimensional, faceted and diamond polished, each piece its own work of manually crafted art. And you'll note that the dial does have more pronounced depth and dish than the Rolex because the 24-hour scale is internal. 40mm, let's move out a little bit so you can get a better sense of this one on my wrist, 40mm in diameter. The watch is far more compact lug to lug. It measures 46.1 lug to lug, but once you add the solid end links, it does flare to 49.5. So lug to lug, these watches are identical. 14.3 millimeters thick with a little bit of a stepped and choppy case flank. Not perfectly compatible with all cuffs, but it's not a thick watch. You should be okay with most sleeves. You can see it's ready to duck under my shirt sleeve here. Distinction in design philosophy, the Rolex with a 20 millimeter lug spacing here, a downright narrow and vintagey 19 millimeter spacing. The bracelet is quite distinct from the Rolex, as it feels more like Rolex's own Oyster Sports bracelet than the Jubilee does. The Jubilee feels like a dress bracelet. The three-link design used by Grand Seiko feels and looks a little bit more robust. You can feel in the hand it's more solid. It has handsome double finish with polish as well as satin, and you can see there's a handsome hairline bevel, a transitional surface from the flanks to the outer faces. All of the removable links are fixed with screws, and you can see there are some half links built into the system. The clasp is low in profile and easy to use with a twin trigger system, but it doesn't have the built-in degrees of adjustability that the Rolex has. The case, however, does flaunt its finery in a fashion that the Rolex simply cannot. Faceted, satined, polished, black polished no less. This is the famed tin plate manual Zaratsu finish of which Grand Seiko fans speak so lovingly. A near mythical manual labor, it involves eye-hand coordination, hand pressure, as well as sort of gut instinct and artisanal experience to create optically smooth surfaces on this 44GS style polyhedron case that are nevertheless millimetrically precise from side to side. And you can see the facets at the end of the lugs. There's both an artistry to the shape of this case and the finish of this case that the Rolex simply can't match. Again, we'll try to show the dial to best effect, and I think this is probably its best angle. If you want to get a sense of the pattern on the dial, this is where you're going to see it. You're also going to see that the quality of the dial in terms of dial furniture, hand finish, index finish, and depth, the quality is just a little bit more compelling than the rather flat and one might even say distinctly drab Rolex dial, which is stolid and sober, but not scintillating like the Grand Seiko. The Grand Seiko is redolent of its own brand's character as the Rolex is of Geneva's norms. Now, the timepiece does feature a display case back, which sets it apart from the Rolex. A Grand Seiko, handmade, hand-adjusted, 6-position regulated, caliber 9S86, 36,000 vibrations per hour like a Zenith El Primero. It features stop seconds, a quick set date, 12 and 24-hour dual time zones, 100-meter water resistance, and factory proclaimed precision of -3 + 5 or better. Of course, it has a 55-hour power reserve, which is quite impressive given the high rate of the escapement. Now, you can see the movement here. You cannot with the Rolex. I consider that to be an advantage Grand Seiko. Let's talk a little bit about the advantages of these watches vis-a-vis each other. The first thing you've got to remember with the Rolex is it has a time-tested and I would even say time-immune style. Timeless, truly, but also immune to planned obsolescence, as owners of the first Pan Am GMTs would recognize 60 years later, or one might say 64 years later, this watch as the successor to their own timepiece. This thing does defy the ravages of age. Also important, if you are into status, if you are into a store of value, these are considerations for many watch buyers, and this is a watch that sells new for $9,250 and sells pre-owned for $19,000 to about $19,500. Something to consider. The watch also features lume, so if you're a traveler who deals with those in-between hours, you're going to find that the loomed dial might be the only choice for you. It is quite functional. The date is outrageous under its Cyclops magnifier, but it's also more legible. You have the bezel, yes, which gives you the ability to temporarily read a third time zone, but you also can use it as a timing instrument. Let's face it, we can approximate the quarters and we can approximate the hours and use this, since it's not a dive bezel, as a timing instrument for non-life-saving scenarios, or simply a shield for your watch, as the Serichrome bezel insert is designed to shield the watch from scratches and scuffs that would directly afflict the Grand Seiko. Also important to remember, 5-year warranty here. That's significantly more than Grand Seiko's 2, so advantage Rolex. Also worth mentioning, for comfort and ventilation, this is the bracelet you want. It's light and silken on the wrist, so it's not quite as robust as the Grand Seiko bracelet, but it does vent better and it's more comfortable. It's one to live with during those 12-hour flights between continents. Important to mention, attested accuracy. Rolex swears to -2 + 2 per day or better, the superlative chronometer standard. Grand Seiko swears to 3 plus 5, but they mentioned that is a stationary watch. Rolex does not qualify its timing attestation. Slimmer, 12.1 millimeters thick versus 14.3. You can see the Grand Seiko, though not a thick watch, looks downright chunky compared to the Rolex in profile. And I'll also mention it's important to regard the Rolex as a somewhat more adept dress watch. No longer a utilitarian pilot's instrument. I would say if you're going to pair one of them with a suit, they both work well, but this one simply works better. So let's talk about some tech. Advantage Rolex, 70-hour power reserve versus 55. Parachrom blue anti-magnetic hairspring, robust. Also, free sprung with a full balance bridge. You can see the Grand Seiko lacks both of these features, and we know because we can see through its caseback. Not free sprung, not a full bridge. So the Rolex both longer legged, more anti-magnetic, and perhaps a little bit more robust in the face of shock. This watch is hyped to infinity, but there are plenty of reasons to love it objectively. Now let's talk about the Grand Seiko. This is a timepiece that features dial style by a mile. Look at that stamping, look at that galvanizing, look at that varnish or lacquer. Incomparable. Advantage Grand Seiko. The display caseback. Do you love movements? You can see the one you pay for with the Grand Seiko, and the finish is sufficient that you will want to see it. So Grand Seiko showing respect, giving you the same 100-meter water resistance but a display caseback. Moreover, rarity, 700 pieces of these made, and Grand Seiko is a brand that is scarce in general. So not only will you see few, if any, of these SBGJ 227s, but you're unlikely to see too many Grand Seikos. Rolex probably monopolizes office parks around the world, and in my experience, that's the truth. Also important, case finish. Zaratsu is no joke. The optical finish of these surfaces, which are remarkably sharp and smooth, flawless in every respect. Advantage Grand Seiko, a hand-finished case and a hand-finished watch, rare in this price point. Moreover, I'm going to mention that the style of the case is distinctive. The 44GS just has more character than the rather anodyne and generic Rolex Super case. If you've seen this case, then you've seen the Sub, you've seen the GMT, you've seen the Explorer 2, you've seen the Sea Dwellers. They all look like scaled versions of the same thing. The 44GS case is distinct from other Grand Seiko cases and distinct from other brands, period. Also, important to mention that the watch has a distinctive 10 beat per second heartbeat like an El Primero, and I find that to be romantic. I also find that on a smaller wrist, this watch wears just a little bit better thanks to its short span from lug to lug, and if you were to throw it on a strap, it would look both more congruent on a strap, that is, it doesn't seem wedded to its bracelet the way the Rolex is, and it would be more compact across the wrist. So if you're going to wear your watch on a strap for aesthetics or fit, this is the obvious choice of the two. Moreover, the timepiece has legibility by day. It's simply easier to pick out the contrast on that dial than it is on this one. The hands are the downfall of the Rolex. They're just not big enough. Here, the contrast pops. Moreover, no Cyclops eye. And guess what? We can read the date just fine. I don't consider this to be a bug. I consider this to be a feature. Value. This is a watch you can buy pre-owned for $7,000 versus about $19,000 and up for the GMT. So in terms of getting more for your money, Grand Seiko. Plus, there's something to be said about the watch's underdog appeal. This is a Shita no Joe for your wrist. A timepiece that is both more colorful and more rife with character. It's also the lovable underdog, and I happen to identify with that. Plus, the world needs more green watches, so I'm a Grand Seiko fan. Between these two, give me the SBGJ 227. Let me know in the comments below which of these two champions you would pick.